All right. Wonderful morning to the first person that got into this room. So thank you very much for coming in. Nice. On time. You've been waiting. I think it was either Clive or Boitumelo that came in first, racing into the room. But we're already on our way with Edith, Friki, Kampemba, Mohammed Foda. Very good morning for where you are. Thank you for dialing in. If you can let us know in the chat, because we're going to use the chat function a little bit today when you guys ask your questions. Let us know how you're doing, where you are, which part of the world you are dialing in from. I'm in a very cold Pretoria this morning, and it's been like this for the last couple of days. So I wonder if anyone is feeling a little bit warmer than I am. Cape Town is cold, says Thomas. Let us know where you are, where the weather is. Cape Town is cold is not something I really want to hear right now, but because I am coming there in a couple of days. But let us know, say hello in the chat. Tell us what part of the world you're in. Select hosts and panelists so we can all interact with your message. Just say hello. Let us know in the chat where you are. Clive is in a chilly Johannesburg. Welcome to Gauteng, Clive. This is how things often go around this place. Centurion, may as well be in Pretoria, huh? Good morning to you all. Thank you for coming on to this wonderful webinar. I'm really looking forward to what we have today. Two top CFOs, ESG experts, and a founding member of Tangelo. So this is going to be really, really exciting. See what we get out of today. Amar Khrobela is in Hartbeespoort. Must be nice out there this morning, perhaps. All right. Thank you. We'll give it a few more minutes as the people start to come in. And thank you all for jumping onto this webinar with us. We're really looking forward to this one. So the question is this the end of the CFO? Why the Chief Value Officer is the coolest new addition to the C-suite? How many of you have both the CFO and the CVO? We'll find out pretty soon as we try to get this show on the road. Thank you all for joining our webinar, brought to you in partnership with Tangelo Software. I'll tell you a little bit about them in a few seconds as we get this show on the road. And I'm hoping that we will spend some quality time, get some insights on what the ESG journey looks like and whether the CFO is indeed getting ready to pack or at least change their title. This is why you're here. This is, if you were expecting any other webinar today, stick around. You might learn something from this one because we've got some really top people that will share their insights if this is in case indeed the end of the CFO. So we've got Erwin Groenendal, who's the founder of Tangelo Software, Julia Rosa, ESG and Sustainability Lead at 800, Sean Doherty, who's the CFO of Transaction Capital, and Welela Dawit, who's the CFO of Microsoft South Africa. So thank you all once again for joining us today. And if you can, as you jump on, let us know how you're doing. Let us know where you are dialing from, and just generally if you are well and ready to get this show on the road. Thank you very much. The chat function will be available for you. Please select panelists and hosts to ask any questions. Do not wait until sort of the end of the webinar, because I'm pretty sure there will be quite a few things happening as we progress. A few things that may be mentioned in the chat in the webinar today that will help us kind of get the road going. So CFOs are becoming more involved in non-financial reporting and need to start translating their organization's strategic targets into sustainable milestones. Instead of just focusing on day-to-day numbers, you know, that spreadsheet they say never goes away from a CFO, they're looking at the environment, social and governance aspects as well. But does this mean that the F in the CFO has become irrelevant? In this webinar, like I said, it's in partnership with Tangelo Software. I've got Welela Dawit from Microsoft, Sean Doherty from Transaction Capital, Julie Rosa from 800 ESG and Sustainability Lead there. Erwin Groenendal, who's the founder of Tangelo Software, will discuss how CFOs can become value partners beyond traditional finance roles. We'll also hear from the CFOs who perhaps have already started to look at that, and whether this actually means this is goodbye, Mr. and Mrs. CFO. If you at any point you have any questions, please throw them in the chat. Even though we've got a dedicated slot at the end, we will try and get into any questions. But if you feel anything is particularly pressing, it will be good for you to quickly jump in the chat and let us know how, if you have any pressing questions. Awesome. I see a few of you from different places. Courage from SARS. Courage, thank you for coming on. It's a pleasure having you. So I want to get us quickly on the road a bit. And to do that, I am going to ask you a few questions just to get a sense of what type of audience we have in today. So to kick us off, quick icebreaker with an introductory poll. It's going to launch in a bit. 2 quick questions. If you can just give us a sense of what this means to you. 2 simple questions. What do you think? What do you think the role of the CFO should be setting? What do you think the role of the CFO should be in setting the ESG strategy for your organization? What do you think that is? There's a couple of options in there. If we can get up to about 70% performance, I'll end that poll. But there's also a second question at the bottom there. Do you believe that if the CFO is a custodian of ESG, that this will reduce the risk of greenwashing? Greenwashing is a big deal in a country in South Africa, right? So we think so. What do you guys think? Love to get your insights and thoughts. So 2 simple questions. What do you think the role of the CFO should be in setting the ESG strategy for the organization? And the second one, fairly simple question. Do you believe that if the CFO is the custodian of ESG, that this will reduce the risk of greenwashing? I hope I've got some people coming from the governing bodies, the psychers of this world, etc. Right? They might have a few things to say on where this stands. Let's push it to a couple more people. Let's get it to 70%, and I'll end the poll. And then we can slowly start to think about getting the show on the road. So that's our poll. We're almost there, almost there. Just a couple more people take part. Let's push it. Come on, let's push it. There we go. One more person that pushed it across the 70. Now, before I get the general feedback of the audience, I would like my panelists to quickly say hello. I'll start with Erwin by checking where he is. I think he is seeing Mick Jagger outside his window. Erwin, good morning. How are you doing?
Good morning, Brian, and thanks for the introduction. Yeah, I'll quickly share my screen to kick off with some slides to set the stage for the discussion. So thanks all for participating in the panel discussion. And yeah, so just a couple of slides. I'll try to keep it within 10 minutes to kick off the discussion. A short introduction about our company and what we do. So we provide a software platform that allows teams to collaborate on the annual report and any other corporate report. So finance teams, IR teams, corporate communication teams, remuneration teams, all the teams involved can collaborate and take the process in-house, either doing just the corrections and all the iterations at the end, or right from the start. So it empowers teams to build those reports and not have the bottlenecks of just one person in a desktop publishing tool working on the report in a secure way. And we have clients across industries and across the globe. So in South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, throughout Europe and Southeast Asia, typically the larger listed companies. And we help them with the annual report, integrated annual report, and sustainability reporting. So basically our platform takes away the common frustrations of working on these corporate reports in the traditional way. So you might recognize some of those frustrations, but we strike them through, like we take them away by allowing you to get a much more streamlined process in place. And specifically for the finance teams, this might be something you recognize, that like you all know, the last mile of finance, getting to the financial statements and notes, neatly organized in your disclosure management system. But then you have to give them to the team working on the annual report, so they get out of your control. The numbers start dropping when you cross that finish line of the last mile of finance. So there's actually this mile after of producing the external report, when your numbers start living in a desktop publishing tool out of your control. And so lots of triple checking there. So our platform, specifically for the finance department, helps you to stay in control, retain control until the real finish line, the annual report publication. So I'm sure we'll share those slides, and you can download our article on that as well with the link. But the topic of today is this, the end of the CFO, and I highlighted the this because with the this we mean in this context sustainability, the emphasis on sustainability, or more specifically even the sustainability reporting. So where is sustainability reporting? Where does it live? What means? It's in the integrated annual report mostly, and we've seen this in our research that we did in South Africa, more and more supplemental ESG reports. So even in addition to the integrated report, supplemental reports being published by almost half of the JSE 200 companies. And in part, that's of course narrative, explaining the strategy and the approach companies take. But an important part are also the performance data, the metrics, and typical additional ESG report that you see are where that data is being published. So we see Netbank on the right publishing the data tables in a separate Excel spreadsheet, or Cecil publishing the data in PDF in their annual report. But there are alternatives, and our platform helps creating those alternatives with our single source multi-channel approach. It's very easy to both produce the PDF version, but also do a microsite version of the report. And looking at the ESG metrics, so instead of presenting them in a static way in a PDF as tables, the better way would be to present those metrics as interactive charts in that microsite version of the report. Interactivity, so people can explore for additional insights, but also are able to download the information into Excel. So that leads us to another poll question. And the question is the finance department, is your finance department already involved in producing ESG metrics? So the possible answers are no, not at all, to some extent, very much so, or I don't know. So
I put the poll questions already on the screen there, Erwin, and while our guests start completing that, I just want to ask you and go back to that first poll. We had 26% of people saying, no, the CFO should not be the custodian of this. Was that surprising to you at all?
Not the custodian, but the key role, I think, was the top answer. Or...
Yeah, I mean, I'm saying that 74% of them said yes, that he should be the custodian. But I suppose the question is 26% a high number that on here that believe that the CFO should not be the custodian?
Yeah, well, I think there's a lot of debate still going on, like who should own sustainability within an organization. But I think definitely, and we see this reflected in this poll as well, there's definitely a large set of sustainability information that is financially material to a company, and that definitely should be something that is owned by the CFO, of course, by the finance department, of course. But also, if you would look to the broader valuation of a company, I do think with the changing landscape, it is the responsibility of the CFO to also control the sustainability performance, or be part of that process at least.
Sure. Okay. Awesome. We are just crossed the 80% mark for this poll currently, so that's a really good uptake number. I will post that question to the CFOs later on this call. Whether they should be custodians of this as we proceed on.
All right. Just a couple of more slides before we go into the actual panel discussion. I just wanted to update you on some of the most recent developments in the sustainability reporting field, being the Tcfd uptick. So the Tcfd, I think lots of you already know, the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, that is very, very quickly becoming an ad hoc standard, but also it's being mandated in a couple of jurisdictions. So I'll mention some of those. Also looking at the further convergence of sustainability reporting standards, and that's a very good development. There's always been lots of criticism almost on like the plethora of standards and frameworks that are available in ESG and sustainability reporting. So good things happening there. And recently, two of the drafts of the new standards were already published. So let's have a quick look there at the jurisdictions mandating TCFD reporting. United Kingdom, they announced this being mandated at the COP26 in Glasgow last year, quickly followed by New Zealand. But you see lots of other jurisdictions now mandating using TCFD as the framework for reporting on the climate impact of a company, or at least the risks and opportunities there. So we wanted to quickly check how many of you are already applying TCFD. So that's the other poll question here.
Go. Yep. Poll question has been launched.
Yep.
Fairly straightforward.
So we would expect more yes, maybe, but 92, don't know. Not as much as I expected, maybe, but we do see, I guess, steep rise in the voluntary use of TCFD. But as mentioned, so many jurisdictions are now have announced mandating using TCFD as the framework. Yeah, so well, thanks for answering those questions. So I wanted to go into the convergence of the standards, and it's a lot of alphabet soup here, maybe, but we have the SASB standards, the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board. That's a set of standards that has been around for a while, and the International Integrated Reporting Council. And these two organizations have merged last year to become the Value Reporting Foundation. And that will be a short-lived foundation, because they already have announced they will consolidate into a new organization. But they then took the SASB standards with them, so they were then housed within the VRF. But last year at that COP in Glasgow, the IFRS Foundation, which we all know, of course, from the financial reporting standards, they reorganized themselves to allow them to also work on sustainability standards. And they have released that draft, that exposure draft last month, to provide standards for both like general requirements to report on the sustainability related financial risks and opportunities, but also specifically on the climate related disclosures. They've announced that standard, released the draft version of that standard, and the SASB standards have now become part of those IFRS standards. And even the organization itself is consolidating into the IFRS Foundation. So the team working on those standards, actually the original SASB team, but also the CDSB organization has consolidated into those new teams within the IFRS. The Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, their recommendations have now also become part of that new set of standards. So that's a very strong development, very powerful development that has taken place. Very positive that that convergence is there, and which means that we now have like 3 sets of standards. So the one I mentioned on the previous slide, but also the set of standards that has been around the longest, the GRI standards. And the GRI organization has worked closely with IFRS and is also closely working with the European Union to make sure these sets of standards are aligned. So there are like global baselines to which others then can extend on. So the third one that's what's coming from the European Union, and I think we will touch on that in our discussion as well. So where the EFRAG group has been working on the European Sustainability Reporting Standards. So 3 sets of standards, and depending on the region you're in and the approach that you want to take to stick more to financial materiality or also include the double materiality, will determine which framework you use. So I guess that's almost it for now. So let's get into the actual discussion. So the Chief R is the CFO becoming the Chief Value Officer, and I think that was a topic of Mervyn King's keynote back in 2017, and also the title of this book, Accountants Can Save the Planet. One last poll question, sorry about that, before we hand over to the panel. Of course, we want to know what you're using now. So is this the CFO, the Chief Value Officer, or do you have both? Chief something else? We see lots of creative titles around, so maybe using some of those. But I think, and that's good to set the stage for the panel discussion, that now most are still using the CFO, but will opinions change after this discussion? So over to you, Brian.
Yeah, that'll be interesting to see. But I'm also curious, the people that have said other, just put it in the chat. What other title are you actually using, if you can? If you're willing to share, put it in the chat. Give us a sense of what other really is. I'll be interested in knowing a little bit more about the other person, as the others, no pun intended, continue to finish up on the poll. So predominantly still on the CFO. Predominantly still the CFO, but I'm still curious to know. Share it in the chat if you're willing to share what other term is being used in your companies, other than CVO or CFO, or perhaps you've got a dedicated person that purely deals with ESG matters, perhaps, and it's not sitting at the CFO's desk, and those numbers are steadily increasing. There's a few more people that are actually saying, yeah, well, it's neither that or that. So I'm interested to hear what that looks like. So while you do that, I'm going to quickly go to my CFOs quickly on here. So I'm going to start with you, Welela, and I still want to go back to that first poll. But first of all, good morning. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Awesome.
How are you?
I'm all right, thank you. Welela, that first poll, where do you stand? Do you feel you're the custodian?
You know, I would say lately, yes, because sustainability has become a much more reoccurring discussion, and both internally in Microsoft as well as with our customers. And I think we're starting to spend a little bit more time really understanding who plays what role in the ESG conversation. But it's very, very clear that finance does play an incredibly relevant role. Everything from, you know, the role of investor relations and, you know, managing stakeholder expectations and communicating what that ESG strategy is. All of this can help build confidence with, you know, new or prospective investors and with your customers as well. But then when it comes to also the conversation around ESG, a lot of it centers around data. And being able to articulate what you do and the impact it actually has. And when it comes to data, who's the custodian of data? It's finance. And so ensuring that you've got the processes in place in order to be able to harness data into a single source of truth, and then be able to leverage that to support these, reporting requirements and to be able to measure impact of what's being done. A lot of that sits really in the lap of the finance function. And so for me, I would say the more of a discussion it is, and the more of a priority is, and honestly, the more of a regulatory requirement is to provide these disclosures, then it's going to become more and more the responsibility of finance to play a significant role here.
All right, interesting. Okay, Sean, I'm going to come to you. I'll probably stay with the same point. What is it like at Transaction Capital? Do you feel the onus is at your desk? You're the chief value officer, the custodian of ESG.
Yeah, so morning, Brian. We don't call it that. Don't call it CBO. But yeah, I mean, absolutely. I would add maybe one or two others. If you look at Tcfd and you look at the numbers and targets.
Sean, you're breaking up a bit. I don't know whether it's me.
Definitely a transaction. The CFO team, I guess, can you hear me now, Brian?
You're breaking up a bit.
Brian, disappeared.
You haven't disappeared yet, but hang tight. I'll come back. I'll come back to you in a second until we get that sorted. While we get that sorted, Julie, I want to come to you though. I mean, you work right across industry. What are you seeing? And I'm going back to that question. Who's the custodian of this thing?
Yeah, Brian, it's an interesting question, and I see a lot of different companies do it differently. One of the things that stands out for me is that this whole concept of ESG is not a new concept. It's been around. Sustainability reports have been written from the 60s all the way through. In South Africa, the first one was in 1976. But what I am seeing a lot when I'm dealing with clients is this change in the concept of value. And so I was really intrigued when I saw the topic of this conversation, around the chief value officer. And is the CFO going to be the custodian of ESG? Because and I've posed this questions to many of my clients before, and I think it is going to be more relevant for CFOs, and certainly, as Welela said, in the lap of the CFO because of all the different touch points around ESG. But I see a range of different structures, and because ESG also is so broad and covers so many different areas of organizations, it's a bit of a mix at the moment.
Yeah, and Julie, I want to stay with you, right? Because on the later poll, people still said, like, that was 70% of us were saying, well, we're still on the CFO. So we're pretty much saying the CFO is here to stay. So on that point, there has been a lot of talk focusing on ESG recently. What is driving that focus, and should be something that's, because the CFO is, at least from the audience, they believe they're to say, what are your thoughts and what have you seen?
So, like I said, the change in the definition of value is I see it really as three buckets. So firstly, the change of the definition of value is a big issue, from purely financial to non-financial, and the impact of what was called non-financial. I now see a lot of companies call it pre-financial information, which is really the financial information of tomorrow. So I'll unpack that a little bit. The second theme that's really driving a lot of change and focus on ESG is this movement or allocation of capital, conscious capital and investors. And then the third one is around the future of leadership, which is something that I believe very strongly in, and how, companies that incorporate ESG and, bring ESG to the boardroom very often have multidimensional thinking and forward thinking and leadership of the future. So those three themes I see as being a big driver in this focus on ESG, because like I said in the introduction, it's been around for a long time. It's an evergreen concept. We've had from the 1976, when the first ESG report, which was, obviously wasn't called an ESG report in those days, was written in South Africa. It's continued in different, had different naming conventions, but it's been there the whole time. But now all of a sudden it's getting all this focus. And people are seeing, and companies are aware of the link between the non-financial or pre-financial metrics and the financial metrics, how you treat your staff, how you preserve the environment, the ethics of the organization, how you remunerate staff. These all have financial consequences, and this is becoming really evident. The other one is the issue of materiality. Companies have to prioritize. You can't focus on everything in an organization. And this is something which I believe should be under the guidance of the CFO. Companies need to translate their environmental, social, and governance tools into sustainability milestones. And there has to be budget for it. You can't have a plan without budget. And so that, again, sits squarely within the realm of finance. And
well,
then,
I saw Welela nodding, sorry there, Julie, but I'll come to it. I'll let you finish. Something just came to mind. I'll come to Welela quickly.
Sorry, do you want me to?
Yeah, I said you can finish up, and
okay. So, and then the reporting and telling the story. So, I mean, Erwin covered that really, really well. But the skill sets to report on ESG targets are already within the finance team. The execution and delivery of the sustainability strategy, and then which framework to use and how to tell that story, because it's so important. That information is relayed to stakeholders, because that's around value for your organization. So that's the one theme, which is that I see really playing out a lot as value. The second one is around the movement and allocation of capital. Raising capital is critical role of the CFO, and with movement of capital, conscious capital, sustainability linked loans, green bonds, credible ESG story is essential. The increases are, Morningstar, they state that there's a 9% quarterly increase. It's across all asset classes. At the end of last year, there were almost 6,000 sustainable funds globally. And so is this going to be a barrier to entry and to be able to access finance if you don't have a credible ESG story? And it shows no signs of slowing down. We're just seeing this escalate. And then the third bucket that I really see playing out is that of leadership, and we're fortunate today to be surrounded, to have Welela and Sean, great examples of leadership and who take ESG really seriously. But ESG is complicated, and there are a lot of counter narratives, and we have to also be aware of that. And if we get buy-in from the board, we get buy-in from the CFO, we can really drive change in a positive direction for organizations. We have to be aware that a lot of people do see it as a tick box exercise, that they're paying lip service, it's a grudge expense. And unless it's supported by the top and the leadership, it's not really going to drive the organization forward. And it's actually going to be, or could be a waste of time. There'll be a lot of fragmentation. And so leadership really is in the realm of the future, and it's about future thinking, it's about strategy, and it's about the future objective and getting alignment. And those are the three themes that I see playing out in the ESG space at the moment in the work that we do.
All right, thank you. So you mentioned a couple of very interesting things, and I see Welela nodding ahead. We're talking about the future of leadership and being able to tell the story. And with that, Welela, I want to come to you because you spoke about the role of finance in ESG and how they can use that to sort of enable sustainability transformation. Perhaps you want to chime in on how you're seeing it using data, insights, etc.
Yeah, no, for sure. I can give some context around what we do in Microsoft. As it relates to sustainability, it's not new for Microsoft. It's the first sort of sustainability goals were set back over 10 years ago. And there's been a lot of steady progress done since then. And then, as we've forayed more into this world of cloud, we've seen also just the impact that can have from a sustainability point of view. Just by migrating from on-prem to cloud can reduce carbon footprint by up to 98%. So And then our data centers are optimized and so forth. And so that's a lot of what we do internally, but we also recognize, again, how relevant and important this is for our partners and customers alike. And so this is, again, where the role of finance comes in, but then also just the solutions that we do from the perspective of Microsoft. So, we've got an offering that's essentially cloud for sustainability that, again, goes back to the power of data, which is the most strategic asset. The ability to be able to take unstructured data into a single source of truth model that then gives you the agility and the flexibility to be able to accelerate reporting, be able to be agile and react to any sort of changes from a regulatory requirement in terms of the reporting requirements that are required, connected to real-time data sources so that you get real-time feedback, and so you're not dealing with any sort of time lags. Any sort of carbon accounting perhaps that's required. You've got the ability to be able to tailor your reporting like that, and then also be able to show your performance against goals and just be able to, again, assess the impact that's happening. And ultimately what it's doing is being able to provide the intelligent insights and analysis so that you can actually have control and be able to take that effective action towards sustainability. There are a number of other different tools. I mean, we've got cloud-based tools that also support calculating carbon emissions. You can visualize your gas emissions and then again be able to see root causes, impact on carbon footprint, and how to reduce it further, as you work with the cloud. So again, all of this, again, centers around data, being able to harness it into a single source of truth, and then being able to leverage it to be able to react and respond accordingly. But ultimately, it gives you control to understand the impact you're having, and then give you the insights you need. And again, that's really, again, where finance sort of at the intersection of this. And I really loved what Julie said about kind of the pre-financials and so forth, because I always say finance, it's the language of business, but it's also the output of all of the activities that happen. And that's why it's super important for finance leaders to know. I spend actually very little time on numbers. I spend a majority of my time on the activity that actually then generates the numbers. Because if I'm not operational, if I'm not commercial, if I'm not into the strategy or the activities or whatever it is that's driving whatever the strategic imperatives are for us, it's not going to ultimately yield a number. If I'm focusing on the number, that's sort of a lagging indicator. I'm too late. And so the role of the CFO is really I love the term Chief Value Officer. I think I'm going to change my LinkedIn profile now to that. But it's really, you've got to focus on the pre-financial metrics, those KPIs, the leading indicators, the things that ultimately translate to what the numbers ultimately are. So I love what you highlighted there, Julie.
Awesome, that's good stuff. Sean, before I come to you, I want to go back to Erwin quickly, and I want to get a sense from Erwin. What does it look like in terms of sustainability reporting? That we've already started to chat about. Can you give us a sense of what that looks like in Europe, and how might that impact companies in South Africa? Before I go to Sean.
Yeah. Thanks, Brian. So the big difference with Europe and the rest of the world is that that initiative of setting the sustainability reporting standards is actually from the lawmaker directly. So with any framework or standards, like they can be set, but it's still up to a local jurisdiction to mandate the use of those standards. But here in Europe, the European Union, they've launched this new initiative, adopted a proposal for a new law that will come in place 2024, around that time. They'll actually require 50,000 companies in the EU to report on sustainability. For that reporting, those standards are being set now. And the big difference is it's coming from the lawmaker, so it will be put into law directly. It also requires auditing of those the metrics that are being reported as part of the disclosures that will become mandatory. And it's a pretty different approach when you look at materiality. So like Julie already touched upon, so we're all talking about like the financial materiality now. So the impact on the financials of a company, but Europe goes beyond that and also requires you to report on the impact on environment or social or governance that you have as a company. So not necessarily financially material. So they have to report a lot more but the part that is financial materiality will be is aligned with those other standards. Yeah, so a big different double materiality, and that it's initiative from the lawmaker.
Okay, so it sounds very interesting. Sean, I'm going to come to you. Welela said that strategic imperatives are what bring the number, right? But you still got to focus on ESG reporting. And for you, there's a couple of things that you said when it came to ESG reporting, the numerous standards, corporates using the right opportunity, etc. Perhaps you can come in there and give us a sense of what that looks like, from your lens.
Sure, Brian. Apologies. In Joburg and the lights went out, so I lost my Wi-Fi connection. I hope it's back. So what it's changed over the last little while. And Erwin's first slides, I think, gave a very good picture of that. 3 years ago, there was a big focus on the S and the G in the South African space. There was a focus on fill out this CDP questionnaire, fill out this social questionnaire. Have you done Tcfd? Are you doing, ABC acronym? And there were a plethora of these questions. Where we are now, I mean, just by way of example, one of my investors has asked me, are we going to fill out the CDP questionnaire for them this year? My answer is no. And the answer is no because of the slide that Erwin put up. We have adopted Tcfd, or we're on that journey. We started that journey last year. We understand where IFRS are, and we have looked at their ED, which is out now. We understand that ED will become a proper standard at the end of the year, and we are going to early adopt that. And in that, we will fulfill all the obligations that something like a CDP sort of asks. So I think from that perspective, it's aligning, and that is positive. I think to go back to one of your earlier questions, it's one of the reasons why this space seems to have a home in finance. Finance people do understand IFRS as a concept, and understand the concept that you guys have been speaking about, whether it is boundaries, whether it is materiality, etc., that they do seem to understand that sort of stuff. So I think it does fit here. The question for me around this stuff all the time is a little bit what Julie said earlier, and Welela put it incredibly well. So reporting is just an output of what you do as a company. So I guess if we are ethical companies, and especially in emerging markets where we don't necessarily have the rule makers, Erwin, to hold us accountable, are we going to do the right thing and then report on what we do, as opposed to have reporting functions which are just very, very good and just report very, very well? Because ultimately it is just an output of what you do day to day. So, does the strategy of ESG fit in the CFO's space? I don't think so. I think the CFO is a contributor, maybe a custodian to it. I think the strategy fits in, like all strategy, it fits in multiple areas. It's multidisciplinary, properly multidisciplinary. I think the CFO brings it together, and it's the CFO's job to allocate value where there is value. So, value might look like, it looks like more profit for this and less S today, but it might look like the opposite tomorrow, and it might look like the E on Friday. And I think that's the important piece. How do you allocate between these things, and then allocate that, articulate or storytell that value to your investors? And it would be great one day if investors properly allocated capital to companies that are doing the right thing for the environments they're in, I think.
Yeah, allocate value where there is value. Julie, I'm going to come to you. Just focusing on that value piece, but also in the work that you do and helping kind of companies kind of drive that accountability in ESG and ensuring that they're doing the right thing. What should they be linking their metrics to? What are your thoughts there?
On driving accountability.
Yeah.
So a lot of the work that we do is on taking ESG performance measures and linking them to remuneration, executive and management remuneration, and helping companies to identify. And I love this work because you get right into the strategy. You look at the material issues, you look at where you can really make a difference, and you get alignment in the organization. And I'm a big believer that when it's done correctly, because if it's not done correctly, obviously it's a bit of a disaster, and you're going to have a lot of people that are very unhappy. But when it's done correctly, you know, driving accountability through rewarding your staff. So by including ESG performance measures in their remuneration is something that I'm really, really passionate about, and how you do it. You know, how many metrics, where it goes. Do you use a scorecard? What do you remove when you add those performance measures in? How do you monitor and report on that? And ultimately, how does it feed back into your reporting? Because the remuneration report is one of the most read reports, you know, of the integrated reporting suite. And so that's really exciting work that we do.
So I'm gonna go back to the to the audience quickly, just because you're talking about this decision-making piece, and I'll throw a poll at them quickly. But I also want to remind them, if they have any questions at any point, it's a great opportunity for you to just throw them in the chat, and we'll try and get my guests here to respond. But in the interim, a quick poll. Let's talk about these ratings that we're talking about. Do you think that incorporating ESG ratings into decision-making process will affect the long-term value of your company? We're already starting to see that. With some of the comments are leading to that. Talking about remuneration packages, what that looks like, all that stuff is kind of sitting here. What do you think? What do you think? Do you think incorporating ESG in your decision-making process will affect the long-term value of your business, whether it's direct or indirectly?
Brian, just as you get that poll back, okay, we had this discussion a couple of nights ago. I mean, just as a matter of interest, our largest debt raise at our cheapest funding at our longest tenor ever was a sustainability bond done last year. So I mean, that absolutely impacts your WACC, which absolutely impacts your value. So I mean, we are starting to see that. I imagine the likes of Microsoft are way ahead of where we are in SA. But yeah, we are seeing it in our capital structures.
So you're definitely for the directly here, Sean, yeah? If I relate that to the poll question.
That's right. That's right, and that sort of thing to what Julie said. And again, like, we're on the journey. I don't think we anywhere near where we should be, but the remuneration thing is critical. So you go back to my point about doing the right thing. How do you ensure you do the right thing? You reward the right behaviors. All of us are in corporates. How do you reward you? It's remuneration. Probably a little bit simplistic. I'm not an HR person, but I think that line needs to be very direct.
There you go. Erwin, I see you on mute. You want to throw a comment regarding that? What have you seen in Europe or with some of your clients?
You mean where sustainability sits within the organization for a client? Yeah, well, interesting thing is that we do see people from the sustainability team now join the finance organization. Because they have I think finance needs to be educated on sustainability, perhaps, but also now with the metrics becoming more important and preparing them to be able to be audited. And I think Welela mentioned that as well. Like it makes so much sense to bring that into the finance department with their experience in creating the financial disclosures, and it's just additional financial disclosures, I guess. What's now happening? There will still be stuff remaining, mostly maybe have to do with the double materiality. That's more of a sustainability team. Maybe that's the owner of that. But even those numbers they bring out needs to be audited. So I think the reporting part will definitely be within the finance department, and communicating around sustainability, just like the IR manager, like the sustainability director, or whatever title you want to put on it, like chief sustainability officer. That's more of like the communication part of it, I guess, very close to IR. Yeah, that's what we see happening. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to come to you in a sec, but I want to stay with Erwin just because you spoke about reporting, and what about the electronic reporting?
Yeah, that's a new challenge that will come to the finance department. Is that both the IFRS foundations, but also in Europe, they have both said that we want to have companies report their not just the financials, but also these new ESG metrics in an electronic way, meaning that they can much easily be consumed by anyone who wants to know these metrics. So it's electronic reporting allowing software to read the metrics into systems. So much more large-scale consumption of data can then take place, which then can be much more easily factored into decisions that investment managers can make. So that's a new challenge for the reporting teams, and will certainly add to the whole reporting challenge, and requires like different tool sets to do the reporting.
And that will still be with finance, right? Still be with on the CFO's desk?
Yep.
All right, speaking of tools, Welela, what tools can we expect? What are some examples in the sustainability in terms of tools? Given what the future looks like, I'm sure Microsoft is well ahead. We share.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, as an organization, I am, and I'm actually new to Microsoft. I joined Microsoft. I'm going to celebrate 1 year next month. And you know, the first thing that struck me when I joined Microsoft was just the digital transformation that took place of the finance function prior to me joining. Thank goodness. Because it's through AI and machine learning and bots and just harnessing kind of the power of the cloud, it has simplified a lot of the way that we work. And so, I mean, our forecasting process is primarily done through machine learning, and it's done through leveraging AI, and it takes only a couple of days, and it's not disruptive for me and my team, so we can, you know, focus on working on deals and transactions. All of our data is single source of truth, and so forth. And so all of these principles that we've taken in terms of how we have digitally transformed the way we work and our processes certainly have been applied to what we offer to our customers also. And so, you know, we've got, you know, software as a solution centered around sustainability that can essentially help support and provide, again, you know, centralizing all of the data, being able to meet the regulatory and reporting requirements, the agility and the ability to be able to react and respond quickly to changes as they occur. And then, you know, other things centered around, you know, being able to build management reporting around non-financial and sustainability-driven data requirements. So things like carbon pricing and carbon taxes. Other things also around procurement to pay processes. So ensuring that spend that takes place with your vendors are also in line with the sustainability standards that you've set for yourself. So all of these different things across the value chain that are very much aligned to the overall sustainability goals. We have the tools in order to be able to help people be able to monitor them, be able to track them, be able to report on them, and again, be able to get those value add insights in order to be able to then effectively determine what you need to pivot, what you need to change, and how to you know, adjust to achieve greater impact.
So, Sean, you know, I'm going to come to you. Thanks for that, Welela. And you mentioned some interesting things. So I'm going to give you sort of a, you know, double-edged sword kind of question, right? Let's talk about governance, and I'll get Julie's insights as well. Let's talk about governance and the trade-off between sort of growth and governance, and whether you need to do that trade-off. But also, when we look at the social real issues, you mentioned something quite interesting, and you said companies need to deal with the real issues. Perhaps you can give us your insights there from, you know, from an emerging market perspective.
Sure, Brian. Just to add one thing onto what Welela said from a tool perspective, and what Erwin said, which I think might be something we need to explore, is, you know, just like when you're developing products, you get customer insights. I do think as finance teams, we need to understand what our stakeholders want. So what Erwin mentioned, to me, applies to an asset manager, hedge fund, et cetera, et cetera. You consume large amounts of data through extracting it in some way, shape, or form. Other people may want a report. Other people may want a podcast. Other people may want a one-on-one with management. So SARS may want direct access. I saw there was a SARS guy on here. SARS may want direct access into our ledgers. So I just think we need to think like product people and understand what our stakeholders want as we develop these things out. And unfortunately for us, Welela, it'll be all of the above, I imagine. So we would have to do all of that. From a governance and growth perspective, so I get asked this question a lot. Brian, I'm fortunate, I guess. Transaction capital has grown at, I think a CAGR of 33% over the last 8 or 9 years. So we're not big, but we're growing fast. And the question I get asked often, our 3 founders are still involved in our business. They're still executive directors. They still sit on the board. I get asked, at what stage will they move out and you guys become a normal corporate and then have lower growth rates? Which I find a fascinating question. And I just don't think it's an either or. I think it has to be a both and. I think governance in an emerging market is absolutely critical, as is the S, the social. Governance, and we see it every day in South Africa, what happens when governance goes wrong. I think we have to make sure that does not go wrong. It has already, I guess, in corporate SA, but we have to make sure it doesn't go wrong. So it's critical, but I think it has to be both and. And the other lens of sustainability, just from an emerging market perspective, now this is a very local South African perspective, is we have an economy which is flatlined and going nowhere fast. You want companies and you need companies that are growing, because growth means opportunities, it means jobs, opportunities mean hope, and it means we don't see what we saw last year in July. So I think we have to have both, and we have to find ways to stimulate that. And it's an interesting dichotomy, but I really don't think it's either or. I think it's a both and. And the other question around S, social, again, like how in a place like South Africa, and we all know the stats, we're the most unequal society in the world. It doesn't help that I have my job and I don't know, you qualify as a CA or engineer and you have a brilliant job. That's all cool for the 10% of people that can do that. You don't have a country and you don't have sustainability as a company, as a country, as a society, unless you get the S right. And I do think in the South African context, I don't know about globally, but in the South African context, corporate SA have to do more in that space. Unfortunately, we can't do it without the E anymore because what happened in KZN last week or last month, that's an example of the E in reality. I mean, how does that affect my business? It's a huge impact. I finance Toyota minibus vans in SA Taxi. The production of those is gone, it's not. So for the next 4 months, I have no ability to originate loans. That means, 700 odd people a month cannot have new businesses, which means how many people a month cannot feed their families. So it's those sort of impacts in which we have to think forward. They're all linked. It's not either or, it's all of them. And we have to do more to find growth. We just have to. Otherwise, I think as a society, we're going to struggle. And that's why I say it's not necessarily a reporting thing. It's what you do day to day that lands in a report.
Yeah, absolutely. I was saying, Julie, I was going to come to you and just to get your insights, or overarching insights as we get to the tail end of our webinar today. What would you say? I mean, just commenting on, on the local environment around the governance, perhaps, and even around the social. What have you seen? Do you think we are ahead of our time? A lot more work clearly needs to be done.
I think South Africa is very different, and African is very different to the rest of the world, in particular Europe. So we sort of see the seesaw, with the E at the top and the S at the bottom, because with Europe dominating, particularly around climate, and there's a lot of focus and attention on the E, and you can't ignore it. And we are seeing the effects of climate change. I mean, the floods is a good example, but there are many others. But at the same time, we have people that don't have food on their table. So how do you balance the two? We can't ignore the S in an emerging market. It has to be important. It has to have priority. And I see the G, the governance, as the glue that kind of pulls it all together, because governance is critical. And governance is not only corporate governance, it's how you govern the environmental piece. And, Tcfd talks about that. And it's how you govern the E, the S, and the G, and how you kind of pull it together, and ethics and responsible corporate citizens. yeah, I mean, I don't see it as an either or. I see all three of them as so interlinked and actually equally important, in particular in South Africa and in emerging markets.
But we're not great at governance in South Africa, are we, Julie?
Yeah, that's an interesting topic. I think a lot more can be done. I mean, we've got the King Code, so we've got it all there, and it's just about making sure that we drive governance.
Absolutely,
yeah,
we got to
say
try
much
and
more than that.
drive. We got to keep trying to drive governance. Erwin, as we wrap up, closing remarks from you. And one last question: is this the end of the CFO?
Well, personally, I don't think so. But the scope of the CFO's role is definitely broadening. But I guess they will stick to the CFO title because it's becoming mainstream and yeah, it still fits nicely in the CFO title. No, that I think we're close to the end, right? Brian, do you want to pop that question if people have changed their minds or?
Perhaps people have changed their minds. I was hoping I'll get a few more questions that will come through from the audience. But I see so far I haven't received any questions at all from the audience. But this last minute as I close up, so we'll probably want to run that poll. But as we close up, any closing remarks from Welela while we wait for one more question from the audience? Welela, it seems you're still going to be CFO for a while. Everybody thinks so.
Oh, I'm fine with that. That's good. But I do agree with what Erwin said. I don't think that the title is necessarily going to change, but I think the role itself is going to evolve and the scope of responsibility is going to evolve. And I think also just the way we work. And again, the role of digital transformation and how that plays into the way we work, I think is also going to be one of the enablers to sort of that changing scope. My CFO role today is very different than the CFO role I had just a few years ago. And the way I work is also very different. And part of it is enabled by digital transformation and the tools available to me, which gives me the capacity to do other things. But I think just the times are changing, and the way we value and the things that we prioritize have also evolved. And then that has really also shifted, a bit of my focus.
All right, awesome. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, Welela Dawit, CFO of Microsoft South Africa, Sean Doherty, CFO Transaction Capital, Julie Rosa, ESG Sustainability Lead at 800, and Erwin Groenendal, who's the founder of Tangelo Software, supporting us today in this journey. I'd like to thank you all for a wonderful session with you all. And Courage sends a question. I'll ensure that Erwin is able to respond to that question at some point during the course of the week. So with that, thank you all very much for joining into our session. We'll catch you on to the next one, which so happens to be Operation Target Growth, how CFOs can use digital finance to improve their business performance. And with that, I would like to thank you all for joining us today, and we'll see you on the next one. Good afternoon.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.